In 2019, my boyfriend and I went on vacation to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a place famous for two things: the Civil War and ghosts. While I love history, my hidden reason for wanting to go on vacation there was the chance to explore one of America's most haunted places. My boyfriend and I ended up taking 5 ghost tours in 4 days during our stay. On our last night, we joined a ghost tour that started near a wooded area between a hotel and a residential neighborhood. The guide told us the story of 4 Confederate soldiers who were shot for treason in that spot. The tale went like this. Union soldiers had taken a position on top of a nearby hill when Confederate soldiers rushed to attack them. The attack didn't go well for the Confederates, who retreated back into the trees. There they discovered 4 of their comrades, who had been hanging back, intentionally avoiding the battle, was death. What made this story particularly unusual was that the attack had occurred at night, an uncommon occurrence due to the obvious risk of lanterns revealing soldiers' positions. My boyfriend, who is a skeptic, and I decided to return to that area after the tour to see if we could experience anything ourselves. It was probably around midnight when we went back. We both had recording apps running on our phones, and my boyfriend spent most of the time talking, trying to provoke a reaction from the ghosts. He taunted them, calling them cowards, while I laughed nervously. Despite his efforts, neither of us saw or heard anything during our exploration, much to my disappointment. When we got back to the car, we decided to listen to the recordings. My phone's audio quality wasn't great, but his was much clearer. We played the audio from his phone through the car's speakers. At first, we heard the usual night sounds, crickets chirping, my boyfriend teasing the ghosts, and my nervous laughter. Then, suddenly, we both heard it. 4 distinct shushing sounds, clear as day. We froze and looked at each other in disbelief. My boyfriend swore he hadn't made those noises, and I certainly hadn't either. The first time I ever saw a Ouija board being used, I was the only guy in the room. I wasn't touching it, just standing there, watching. Honestly, I didn't believe for a second that the planchette, the little plastic piece with the window, was moving on its own. I was convinced my girlfriend and her friend were pushing it. We were at my girlfriend's house, and they wanted to talk to the person who supposedly lived there when the house was first built. When the board started spelling out a name, it was long and oddly specific. JMCGILLICUDDY. I stood there thinking they were making it all up, just going along for fun. But the name? That was way too weird. There's no way they both could have come up with something so strange, and they definitely hadn't planned it, because I had just found the board up in the attic an hour earlier while sealing a drafty window. Then the board gave us another piece of information. The house wasn't originally built where it stood. It had been moved to this spot sometime after 1913. I remember thinking that was interesting because outside the house I'd noticed these big round metal things that looked like chain links still attached to the foundation. They were there to strap the house down when it was moved. Out of pure curiosity, I decided to check the county records. I figured it wouldn't hurt to dig around a bit. To my surprise, I found out that there really was a J. McGillicuddy who lived in that house and ran a saloon nearby, which had burned down years ago. He died young, at 33, after being stabbed while trying to break up a fight between 2 of his patrons. That's when the whole thing stopped feeling like a joke. When I was a teenager, I was visiting my family in the north of Portugal, and a group of friends and I decided to explore a supposedly haunted manor at night. Construction on the manor had been halted after multiple fatalities occurred on site. The architect and 2 workers died under mysterious circumstances, and soon local superstition kicked in, making people reluctant to set foot in the place. A couple of years later, another family member who wanted to complete the building also died on site while assessing the structure. So, the manor was left to rot for decades. Wilderness took over, vines covered most of the walls, and the gardens turned into a jumble of weeds. From a distance, it looked eerie in daylight and absolutely terrifying after sunset. Legends about the cursed mansion were rampant, and probably wildly exaggerated. None of us believed in the supernatural, so we just grabbed a flashlight and headed straight in, What we didn't know was that my older cousin and his friends overheard our plans to investigate the house at night and decided to beat us there to scare the hell out of us. They hid in the mansion, and as we arrived, they made sinister noises, moved debris around, cast misshapen shadows, and whispered terrifying words. With just a single flashlight, it was almost impossible to figure out what was going on, and we were obviously scared out of our minds. After what felt like an eternity of torturous fear, my cousin finally revealed himself after we fled to the upper floor of the mansion. He had wrapped himself in a white sheet to look like a ghost. His friends soon came out of hiding, and after a lengthy stream of mockery, insults, and ultimately laughter, we started to clear out of the place. Did I mention the house was unfinished? As we were making our way out, my cousin kept making fun of us, prancing around in that white sheet. The stairs had no railing. Then just like that, he fell. The fall broke his spine, and he died in the ambulance on the way to Porto. I still don't believe in the supernatural, but he became yet another victim of that place. I passed by again this summer, more than 20 years later. Nothing has changed. The mansion remains unfinished. About 5 years ago, I bought an old cottage on a lake in western central New York, right on the border of the Western Finger Lakes region. I renovated it so I could live there year-round, as it had always been my dream to live on this particular lake. There's a bike path across the street that used to be an old railroad bed, which was decommissioned back in the mid to late 1970s. My driveway was part of the old railroad, so as you can imagine, it was pretty isolated from the rest of the world. One night, I went to work but started feeling really sick, so I decided to leave and come home around 1 a.m. I immediately climbed into bed and fell asleep. However, I was suddenly jolted awake from a deep sleep around 3 or 4 in the morning by something I couldn't explain. When I went to roll over, I saw it as clearly as day. There was a man about 6 to 6'5" tall, standing in the middle of my bedroom. He was wearing denim overalls, a pinstriped collared long-sleeve work shirt, a conductor-style hat, and, the weirdest part, an old oil-fired miner's lamp on his hat. The lamp was so bright that I couldn't see his face, but I could make out everything else. I was terrified like a little kid, and I hid under the covers. I poked my head out to see if he was still there, and to my horror, he was. This time, he was starting to lean toward me and move closer to the corner of my bed. Like the 32-year-old man that I am, I pulled the covers back over my head, praying he'd disappear. I was absolutely scared out of my mind. I peeked again, and he was still there. But this time, he was right next to the bed, his hands stretched out, with his left hand positioned a little farther back, almost as if he was about to grab me. I quickly threw the covers over my head again and squeezed my eyes shut. When I finally opened them again, he was gone. It was the wildest and scariest experience of my life. About 3 years ago, me and 3 friends were bored one summer night. There was a thunderstorm rolling through, and for whatever reason, we decided to go to our friend Carissa's house to play with a Ouija board. Now, I'd grown up in a Christian family, so I knew I shouldn't mess with that kind of thing. But honestly, I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, and the idea that they'd need a board game to talk to you, that sounded silly. Carissa's house was completely empty because it was going up for sale the next day. The only things in the house were a card table, a few chairs, and the board. We set everything up, lit a couple of candles, and my friends started asking questions. At first, I wasn't really paying attention, but then I noticed the planchette, the little cursor, was moving really fast. That got my attention. I decided to jump in and put my hands on the board. They kept asking questions, but now the cursor wouldn't budge. Nothing. My friends started saying it must have been me stopping it. In my head, I was like, yeah, right. This isn't real. You guys are just moving it yourselves to freak me out. So I took my hands off and let them keep playing without me. After a while, they said they were talking to a ghost that claimed to be an evil spirit. I wasn't buying any of it. I thought they were just scaring themselves. Then they asked the spirit if it was male or female. The planchette moved, spelling out male. When they asked how he died, the thing started moving so fast across the board that none of us could keep up. It was just flying. They asked it again to repeat itself, and my friend Kylie and I leaned in to try and read it. That's when we saw it spell out, "Get out now." We froze. I told the others what it said, and Carissa asked, "Do you want us to get out?" Right then, the screen door on the front porch slammed open so hard it smacked against the house. At the same time, the heavy wood door flew open and hit the wall with a loud bang. I felt this wave of chills go through me, and my stomach dropped. We didn't stick around. My friends blew out the candles, ended the session, and we got out of there as fast as we could, leaving everything behind, including the board. This happened some time ago while I was in college. I was back at my parents' house, working for the summer. We had 3 bedrooms upstairs: mine, my sister's, and my parents'. My sister was still out of state in grad school. My mom had asked me to do some chores in my room. I had been procrastinating, and then I heard her coming up the stairs. I have a couch in my room that pulls out into a bed. The couch is against the wall, just across from the doorway. The stairs, along with the entire second floor, are carpeted. I didn't want to get fussed at for not doing what I was supposed to, so I laid down on the couch with my face turned away from the doorway. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I continued to hear footsteps coming up the stairs and toward my bedroom. I could hear them shuffling on the carpet and walking right up to the side of the couch. I continued to fake sleeping. Then I heard my mom turn around and shuffle out of the door, back toward the stairs. I smiled to myself and opened my eyes to watch her walk away. When I opened my eyes, I didn't see anyone. I got up, rushed to the hallway to look down the stairs, but saw nothing. I checked the bedrooms upstairs. They were empty. I ran down the stairs and my mom was doing laundry. My dad was down in the basement. I asked my mom if she had just come upstairs. She said no. It was so weird. I literally thought someone had walked into my room and stood next to me. My sister had once told me she thought she saw a little boy in the upstairs hallway while she was lying in bed in her room. Then, years later, after my dad had passed away, but not in the house, my mom said that one night she felt something lay down next to her. These are stories my girlfriend experienced with her twin sister. They happened around 2012. One night, her twin sister was asleep in her room and woke up in the middle of the night by something breathing on her neck. It was a hot, steamy feeling, and she could hear the breathing. She started praying, and the thing went away. On another night, she woke up to something pulling her blanket to the ground and uncovering her. She got up, started screaming, and ran to my girlfriend's room. Another night, she woke up feeling like she was floating. When she opened her eyes, she felt herself drop back onto the bed, which then started to rise slowly. She screamed, and my girlfriend and her mom rushed into the room and witnessed her bed at least 4 feet off the floor. It dropped back down, and they started praying. This type of event happened about once or twice a month. Other occurrences, like her lights turning on and off by themselves, also began happening. It got to the point where she felt someone was on top of her, pressing her down so forcefully she couldn't yell for help or move. It was as though the force wanted to get inside her. She closed her eyes and began to pray. After all of this, her mom finally called a priest to bless the house, and things seemed to get under control. That was until one night, her twin sister got out of the shower and saw what she thought was my girlfriend, dressed as she was in 2005, in a white blouse with long black hair and a cold, silent expression. She screamed, and my girlfriend and her mom ran upstairs to her. Was this a doppelganger? What does it mean? I've heard stories about people dying after seeing one, but I'm not sure. Every time I visit their house, I always feel terrified. One night, I was lying in bed with my girlfriend, and we were asleep when I woke up to the sound of a loud growl, like it was right in my face. About 20 years ago, I experienced one of the most perplexing events of my life while having a cigarette. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up in the middle of the night. After tossing and turning, I just couldn't get back to sleep, so I decided to step outside for a smoke. For reference, I lived in an apartment with a small cement patio out front, which faced a very busy street with a sidewalk running alongside it. During the day, the street was loud and bustling, but at night it became quiet and peaceful. All my neighbors were asleep and the cool night air was calming. As I sat on my patio steps, something large and dark caught my eye in the distance, moving along the sidewalk. Instantly, I froze. The hair on my arms stood up, and my body locked up as if it instinctively knew to stay still. The creature was slowly walking toward me, and I struggled to figure out what it was. It was easily as large as a horse. At first, I thought maybe it was an escaped horse. Though unusual for a big city, people sometimes did walk horses around town. But as it got closer, I realized something was off. There was no rider, and the creature didn't quite look like a horse. It resembled a strange mix between a large black panther, lion, and bear. Its fur was dark and wavy, almost curly, and I could see the steam from its breath. The most unsettling part was that it didn't seem to notice me at all. Perhaps that's why I stayed frozen, letting my cigarette burn out completely. Something inside me knew that if I moved, it would be the end of me. I remained completely still, my body unable to move for what felt like 30 minutes, terrified to make a sound or even breathe. Eventually, I regained control of my body, but the encounter left me deeply shaken. My story happened when I helped a friend out. I met him before his health began to deteriorate to the point where he now needs a wheelchair. These days, we just joke about it, saying he gets us the best parking spots when we hang out. He eventually moved to Alaska, where his parents live, and asked me to help make some modifications to his house to improve his mobility. I agreed to help remodel areas around his house and backyard so he could access them more easily in his wheelchair. His family is well off and also owned other properties, like a really nice cabin where I installed some ramps and rails in the bathrooms. It took about a month to get everything done. I did all the work for free, but I had to get back home because I only had a limited number of days off. People told me I should have enjoyed the trip as a vacation. I could have gone hunting or fishing. But I spent most of the time working or helping my friend, and I don't regret a moment of it. After I got home, my friend called me to complain. He said I'd been rude to his mother while I was there. I joked around a bit when I was with her, but I never disrespected her. It struck me as odd because the entire time I was there, I treated it like a job. Maybe I came off as curt a few times, but there was no way I offended her intentionally. Then he mentioned something else. His mom was upset because I kept opening and slamming doors in the house. That's when it got strange. I told him I hadn't installed a single door or even been near her much. She lived in an upstairs addition to the house, and I never went up there because I was focused on helping him. We didn't talk for a few months after that, and I respected his decision, even though I thought maybe his mom was starting to go senile. When he finally called me again, he apologized. He said his mom had mistaken me for someone else. She thought I was a local contractor, even though we both knew that was impossible. I was back in another state. But his mom insisted it was me she saw walking around her house and slamming doors. She even told him I wasn't welcome there anymore. At first, I didn't care much. I told him not to invite me again if that was the result. I reminded him that I'd spent my entire vacation helping him and doing the work as a favor. He apologized and thanked me, saying I'd done a great job. But the question still lingered. Who was the person upsetting his mom? The issue didn't go away. His mom kept complaining daily that some man was slamming doors in her home. She'd yell at him to stop, and then accuse my friend of inviting people over who weren't supposed to be there. One time, I even called her cell phone to try and clear the air. While we were on the phone, she had to admit it wasn't me because it happened again while she was speaking to me. To this day, she still doesn't want me on her property. I'm not sure what she saw or experienced, but it wasn't me. I once had a girlfriend who claimed to be a sensitive and a channeler, but during that time, she told me something that really freaked me out. I'm always skeptical unless I have logical or reasonable proof, but the following experience shook me enough that I took her a bit more seriously after that. A few weeks after we met, while we were sitting together, she told me out of the blue that there's a black dog that follows me around. I've never told her about Blackie. a dog I had when I was a child, whose death utterly devastated me for years. He was a black lab and my best friend for many years, always following me around like a shadow when he was alive. He died while I was away, and I wasn't told until I got back. The guilt of not being there to comfort him or say goodbye ate away at me for a very long time. I've never mentioned him to her, at least not that I can remember, so I don't know how she knew about him. Her description of what he looked like matched how he appeared in life. Though he did look like the typical black lab, and they are fairly common, I wish I'd thought to ask more questions, but I was too freaked out at the time. A few years later, when I was in a better mental space and the wounds of grief had dulled, I told him in my mind that if he really is following me, I don't mind if he goes on to wherever things go after they die. He's welcome to follow me forever if he wants, but I don't want to hold him back just because of my selfish grief or guilt. I felt foolish thinking in my head to something that may or may not be there, but I wanted him to know if he was really present. I haven't had any tangible experiences to prove he's there, nothing like what some people say they've experienced after their beloved pets die. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back to visit, and I hope he does at least once.